She was just another traveler, poised and unassuming. But to a privileged passenger and two reckless officers, her very existence was a provocation. What happens when bias ignites a fire that consumes the guilty?
Chicago O'Hare International Airport thrummed with restless energy on a humid Friday afternoon in June 2025. The terminal was a living organism, its arteries clogged with travelers, businessmen in rumpled suits, families with overstuffed backpacks, students tethered to earbuds. Overhead, loudspeakers droned flight updates in crisp English interspersed with bursts of Spanish and Arabic. The air was thick with the scent of burnt coffee floral perfume and the faint chemical tang of industrial cleaner. Digital boards blinked relentlessly, their green and red letters a heartbeat, tracking the world's comings and goings. At Gate B12, Atlantic Airlines flight A148 to New York was preparing to board. Passengers formed ragged lines, their impatience palpable. Some tapped phones. Others flipped through magazines. A few coaxed fussy children with promises of snacks. Among them stood Vivian Marshall, a 49-year-old black woman whose quiet elegance cut through the chaos. Her tailored charcoal blazer and silk blouse spoke of authority, her sensible flats of a long day's travel. A silver watch gleamed on her wrist, and a sleek leather satchel rested by her feet. Vivian, fresh from a grueling 3-day legal conference, was headed home to Manhattan, yearning for the sanctuary of her Upper West Side apartment. She skimmed case notes on her tablet, her brow creased with focus. As Chief Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, Vivian had spent decades navigating the law's complexities and the world's prejudices. Her journey to the bench had been a gauntlet of slights and barriers. The law professor who doubted her intellect, the colleague who questioned her credentials, the client who assumed she was a secretary. Each wound had forged her resilience, but also her vigilance. Today, to preserve her anonymity, she traveled alone without aides, or security blending into the crowd like any other passenger. Yet even in this anonymity, Vivian carried a memory that never faded. 20 years ago, as a young public defender, she'd fought for a black teenager wrongfully accused of theft. The evidence was flimsy, but the jury's bias was ironclad. His conviction and the years it stole haunted her. It was why she'd climbed the judicial ladder, not for prestige, but to ensure justice wasn't a privilege reserved for the few. Now, as she waited at Gate B12, that memory lingered a quiet fire in her chest. Not far away in the same priority line stood Evelyn Chandler, a white woman in her early 60s. Her Chanel scarf and diamond-studded bracelet screamed wealth, but her tight-lipped scowl betrayed a deeper unrest. Evelyn's life was a carefully curated display of privilege, country club luncheons, charity galas, a Manhattan penthouse, but beneath it lay an insecurity that gnawed at her. The world was changing too fast, and people like her, she believed, were losing their rightful place. Her eyes scanned the crowd, landing on Vivian with a flicker of contempt. To Evelyn, a black woman in the business class line was an intrusion, a crack in the order she clung to. Evelyn muttered to her companion, a silver-haired man engrossed in his Wall Street Journal. "Look at this," she said. Her voice low but sharp. They let anyone into priority now. Standards are slipping. The man grunted, uninterested, but Evelyn's irritation grew. She adjusted her scarf, her lips pursing as she watched Vivian tap her tablet. In Evelyn's mind, shaped by decades of unchallenged assumptions, Vivian didn't belong. She belonged in Coach or nowhere at all. Unable to contain herself, Evelyn strode to the gate agent's desk, her heels clicking like a metronome. The agent, a young woman named Maria, with a strained smile, looked up. "Excuse me," Evelyn said, her tone a blend of honey and venom. "I'm concerned about security. That woman over there." She tilted her head toward Vivian, careful to keep her voice just low enough to avoid a scene. She's been staring at my luggage. It's unsettling. I don't think her ticket is legitimate. You should check it. Maria blinked, caught off guard. Ma'am, all passengers in this line have valid boarding passes. The boarding process is. Evelyn cut her off, her smile tightening. I'm not asking for excuses. I'm a frequent flyer, and I expect safety. Do your job. Her words, cloaked in concern, were a calculated jab designed to provoke action without exposing her bias outright. Maria hesitated, her eyes flicking to Vivian, who remained oblivious, absorbed in her work. The exchange drew a few curious glances, but most passengers stayed buried in their own worlds. Vivian, catching the tail end of Evelyn's complaint, felt a familiar prickle of unease. She'd heard that tone before in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in grocery stores. It was the sound of entitlement of someone who saw her as less. She straightened her fingers, pausing on her tablet, and met Evelyn's gaze for a fleeting moment. Evelyn looked away, but the damage was done. The air between them crackled with unspoken hostility. The subtle commotion caught the attention of two airport police officers, patrolling nearby Officer James Sullivan, a 52-year-old veteran with a weathered face, and Officer Ethan Parker, a 29-year-old rookie with a chip on his shoulder. Sullivan had spent 3 decades in law enforcement, his instincts honed by countless shifts, but clouded by biases he'd never questioned. He prided himself on reading people, but his lens was warped quick to see threat and difference. Parker, by contrast, was all bravado, his buzz cut and tight jaw, a testament to his need to prove himself. Fresh from the academy, he saw every call as a chance to wield power. Evelyn spotted the officers and seized her opportunity. She approached them, her demeanor shifting to one of practiced distress. "Officers, thank you for being here," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sell her story. "I'm really worried about that woman." She pointed discreetly at Vivian. "She's been watching my bags, acting strangely. I don't feel safe boarding with her. Please, can you check her thoroughly? We can't have risks on a plane." Her words were a masterclass in manipulation, wrapping prejudice in the guise of civic duty. Sullivan's eyes flicked to Vivian. Her polished appearance, blazer, satchel, calm demeanor didn't match Evelyn's portrait of a threat, but his instincts, steeped in years of snap judgments, leaned toward the complainant. A well-dressed white woman's word carried weight. Parker, eager to act, nodded, his hand resting on his radio. To them, this was routine. A complaint, a quick resolution, another notch in their day. They approached Vivian, their boots heavy on the polished floor, parting the crowd like a tide. Ma'am, Sullivan said, his voice gruff, but measured step out of line. "We need to speak with you privately." The command carried an edge, a presumption of guilt that set Vivian's nerves alight. She'd faced this before, authority wielded as a weapon, but she was no stranger to standing her ground. She stepped aside, her satchel in tow, her posture unyielding. "What's the issue, officers?" she asked, her voice steady, her dark eyes locking onto Sullivan's. He repeated Evelyn's accusation almost verbatim. "We've received a report that you're acting suspiciously, possibly posing a security risk. Show us your ID and boarding pass." Vivian opened her satchel, retrieving her driver's license and business class ticket with deliberate calm. "These are valid," she said, handing them over. "I'd like to know the specific behavior I'm accused of and who made this complaint. I've been standing here working like everyone else." Parker's jaw tightened at her composure. "Why so many questions?" he snapped. "Just do what we say. Your attitude's raising red flags." Sullivan, flipping through her documents, paused at her name. Vivian Marshall. He studied her blazer, her satchel, then her face, his skepticism growing. "Business class," he said, his tone laced with insinuation. "What's your job? How'd you get this ticket?" The question wasn't about security. It was about her place, her right to be here. Vivian felt the sting a blade slicing through years of hard-won respect. She'd heard it before in law school, when a professor suggested she'd been admitted to fill a quota. In court, when a bailiff mistook her for a defendant. Each time she'd swallowed the pain, channeling it into her work. But today, standing at Gate B12, she was done swallowing. She was Chief Judge Vivian Marshall, and she would not be diminished. Your questions are rooted in bias, not evidence. She said, her voice low but sharp, each word measured. My profession and finances are none of your concern under the law. I'm a U.S. citizen, a lawful passenger, entitled to respect and equal treatment. Your conduct violates my civil rights and your own ethical standards. Return my documents and provide your names and badge numbers. Her words landed like a gavel reverberating through the gate area. Sullivan's eyes narrowed. Parker's face flushed crimson. They weren't used to defiance, especially from a black woman they'd pegged as an easy mark. The crowd stirred, sensing the shift. A college student slipped her phone from her pocket, recording discreetly. A middle-aged woman whispered to her husband, "This is wrong." Evelyn, watching from a distance, folded her arms, a smug smile tugging at her lips. "You don't get to lecture us," Parker barked, stepping closer, his voice rising. "We're in charge here." Sullivan, his patience fraying, leaned in his voice, dropping to a menacing growl. "You think you're clever, huh? Playing the lawyer card." Then, in a moment of reckless fury, he muttered a racial slur just loud enough for those nearby to hear. The word was a grenade, exploding in the tense silence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Maria, the gate agent, froze, her hands trembling. A young man in a hoodie muttered, "Did he just say that?" Vivian's heart pounded a drumbeat of rage and pain. She'd faced prejudice before, but never so raw, so public. Her mind flashed to that long-ago client, his life undone by a system that saw his skin before his humanity. She refused to let these men break her. "You've crossed a line," she said, her voice a blade cutting through their bravado. "You'll be held accountable for this to the fullest extent of the law." Sullivan laughed, a harsh, hollow sound. "Accountable. You're under arrest for disturbing public order, resisting lawful orders, and threatening flight safety. The charges were a fabrication, a flimsy shield for their wounded egos." Parker, emboldened, lunged forward, grabbing Vivian's arm with force. She stiffened, but didn't resist, knowing any struggle would be twisted against her. "You have no right," she said, her voice ringing clear, a beacon in the chaos. "Let go of me." Parker ignored her, yanking her arms behind her back. The cold snap of handcuffs bit into her wrists, the metal too tight, pinching her skin. Pain shot through her, but worse was the shame, a public spectacle orchestrated by bias. The crowd was a kaleidoscope of reactions. A young woman wiped tears from her eyes. An older man shook his head, muttering, "This ain't right." Others stood silent, complicit in their inaction. Evelyn's smile widened, her victory complete. Sullivan, arms folded, barked, "Move." Parker shoved Vivian forward, her satchel left behind, like evidence of her erased dignity. They marched her through the terminal, a parade of injustice. Travelers paused, their eyes following the handcuffed woman, flanked by 2 officers. Some whispered, others stared, a few pulled out phones to record. Vivian kept her chin high, her steps measured, refusing to let the cuffs define her. Her mind raced, cataloging every detail, Sullivan's badge number, Parker's sneer, the weight of the metal on her wrists. She thought of her courtroom, where she'd spent years wielding the law as a shield. Today it had failed her, but she would reclaim it. The airport police station was a cramped office, wedged between a newsstand and a smoothie kiosk. Inside, Officer Sanjay Patel sat behind a dented metal desk, his face etched with the fatigue of a double shift. Sullivan and Parker shoved Vivian forward, their report, a torrent of distortions, disruptive passenger, resisted orders, potential threat. Patel, accustomed to the airport's daily dramas, began entering her details into the system. "Name?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Vivian Marshall," she replied, her voice calm, unwavering. "Age, address." She answered methodically, her composure unnerving Parker, who shifted uneasily. Then came the routine question. Occupation. Sullivan and Parker, leaning against the wall, exchanged smirks, expecting something trivial. Vivian raised her head, her gaze piercing Patel's. "I am Chief Judge Vivian Marshall of the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit." The room froze. Patel's pen slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the desk. His eyes darted to her ID, then back to her face, sweat beading on his brow. Chief Judge, a titan of the judiciary. One step below the Supreme Court, with the power to shape federal law and ruin careers with a single ruling. Sullivan's smirk vanished, his face drained to a ghostly white. Parker staggered, his knees buckling as if the ground had dissolved. Their minds replayed every word, every action, the slurs, the cuffs, the shove. They hadn't just detained a passenger, they'd assaulted a federal judge. Terror gripped them. Sullivan's hands trembled. Parker's breath came in shallow gasps. Their careers, their freedom hung by a thread. "Judge," Chief Judge Marshall Sullivan stammered, his voice barely audible. We had no idea. I'm so sorry. This is a mistake, a terrible mistake." Parker dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Please, Judge, have mercy. We were just following a complaint. We have families." Their pleas, desperate and hollow, echoed in the small room, but Vivian remained unmoved. She'd seen too many defendants feign remorse to be swayed by this display. She turned to Patel, her voice a quiet command. "Remove these handcuffs immediately." Patel fumbled for the key, his hands shaking as he unlocked the cuffs. Red welts marked her wrists, a silent testament to her ordeal. Now she continued, rubbing her skin. "Call your chief, inform him I'm here, and demand his presence. Contact the U.S. Marshal Service and the Chief of Staff for the Second Circuit. I want their representatives here at once." Patel nodded, scrambling for the phone, his voice cracking as he relayed the orders. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. Within 25 minutes, Airport Police Chief Robert Callahan arrived, flanked by his deputy Lisa Moreno and a senior security official, Mark Hensley. Their faces were grim, the weight of the crisis etched in their eyes. Moments later, U.S. Marshals stormed in, their badges gleaming, led by Marshal David Torres. They were joined by Sarah Kim, the Second Circuit's chief clerk, and 2 court attorneys, their expressions a mix of outrage and resolve. The tiny station became a pressure cooker, every word heavy with consequence. Callahan approached Vivian, his head bowed. "Chief Judge Marshall, I am horrified by this travesty. My officers' actions were inexcusable. We'll investigate thoroughly and ensure accountability." His sincerity was genuine, but Vivian's expression remained stone. "Words are not enough, Chief Callahan," she said, her voice steady. "Your officers violated my civil rights and abused their authority. I expect swift and severe consequences." An impromptu meeting convened in a corner of the station chairs, scraped together in a makeshift circle. Vivian, flanked by Kim, recounted the incident with surgical precision, Evelyn's whispered accusation, the officer's biased intervention, the racial slur, the handcuffs. Her voice never wavered, each word a brick in the case against her assailants. Torres took notes, his jaw tight. Callahan's face grew paler with every detail. The marshals exchanged glances, their protective instincts on high alert. Kim, a veteran of court crises, added procedural context, citing federal statutes on civil rights violations. Callahan acted decisively. "Officers Sullivan and Parker, you're suspended indefinitely. Surrender your badges, weapons, and radios. The two complied, their hands shaking, their futures unraveling. Callahan ordered the Internal Affairs Division to collaborate with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, sealing all evidence gate B-12 cameras, body cam footage, witness statements. Evelyn Chandler's role was prioritized. Investigators located her at the gate, still waiting to board. She was escorted to a private room for questioning, her haughty demeanor crumbling as she realized the gravity of her actions. The joint investigation moved with relentless efficiency, driven by the case's high profile. Security footage from Gate B-12 showed Evelyn's pointed whispers to Maria, followed by her approach to the officers. Body cam audio captured Sullivan's slur and Parker's aggressive tone, undeniable proof of their prejudice. Witnesses, including Maria and a passenger named Aisha Carter, a 22-year-old student who'd recorded the scene, corroborated Vivian's account. Aisha's video uploaded to X went viral within hours, amassing millions of views. Hashtags like "Shawna Justice for Vivian" and "Shawna O'Hare Outrage" trended, sparking debates about race power and accountability. Commenters on X raged, "This is America in 2025, still judging skin over substance," one wrote. Another posted, "Those cops are done. You don't mess with a federal judge." Evelyn, confronted with the footage, and Aisha's video, faltered. "I was just concerned about safety," she stammered, but her lies unraveled under scrutiny. Investigators probed her motives, uncovering a pattern of entitled behavior, complaints about suspicious passengers, always people of color, on previous flights. She faced potential charges for providing false information and inciting discrimination crimes, carrying fines and possible jail time. Her attorney, sensing the mounting evidence, advised cooperation, but Evelyn's defiance wavered. Sullivan and Parker, their careers in tatters, were terminated from the airport police force after a swift internal review. The FBI's investigation dug deeper, interviewing colleagues who described Sullivan's history of racially charged remarks and Parker's volatile temper. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois filed federal charges violating civil rights under Color of Law 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 242, unlawful detention and conspiracy to violate civil rights. The case, given Vivian's stature, drew national attention, with outlets like CNN and the New York Times running front-page stories. Legal analysts on X debated the charges, with one prominent attorney posting, "This isn't just about Marshall, it's about every person of color profiled without cause." The trial, held in Chicago's Dirksen Federal Courthouse, was a media spectacle. Reporters packed the gallery, cameras flashing, as Vivian took the stand in March 2026. Her testimony was a masterclass in restraint, recounting the incident without embellishment, her dignity unshaken. She described the slur, the cuffs, the march through the terminal, her voice steady but laced with quiet pain. "I've dedicated my life to justice," she said, her eyes sweeping the jury. But on June 13, 2025, justice was a stranger at Gate B-12. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Patel, played the body cam footage, Sullivan's slur echoing in the silent courtroom. Jurors shifted uncomfortably. One wiped away tears. Aisha's video followed, its raw clarity damning. Patel called witnesses Maria, who described Evelyn's manipulative complaint; Aisha, who spoke of her horror at Vivian's treatment; even Patel, the duty officer, who admitted his initial shock at Vivian's identity. The evidence was ironclad, a tapestry of bias and abuse. The defense, representing Sullivan and Parker, grasped at straws. Sullivan's attorney argued he'd acted on a credible complaint, misjudging the situation under pressure. Parker's counsel claimed his client was young, inexperienced, following his partner's lead. But the jury wasn't swayed. After a 3-day deliberation, they convicted both on all counts. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Sullivan's head bowed, Parker's eyes glassy with panic. The sentencing judge, Honor Patricia Nguyen, a colleague of Vivian's, delivered a blistering rebuke. Your actions betrayed the public's trust and targeted a woman whose life's work upholds the law, she said. Racial bias in law enforcement is a poison, and you poured it freely. Citing the need for deterrence and the victim's prominence, Nguyen sentenced each to 3 years in federal prison, a stern but fair penalty under sentencing guidelines. Legal scholars noted the sentence's balance severe enough to send a message measured enough to withstand appeal. Evelyn, to avoid a trial, pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of making false statements to a federal officer, 18 U.S.C. Por of 1001, she paid a $450,000 fine, her reputation in ruins. Ex-posts mocked her fall from penthouse to pariah, one user wrote. Her social circle, once a bastion of elite Manhattanites, shunned her. Her invitations to galas quietly rescinded. The financial hit was steep, but the social exile cut deeper. The fallout reshaped O'Hare's operations. Callahan, under pressure from the public and city officials, mandated anti-bias training for all 4,200 airport staff, with quarterly audits to ensure compliance. New protocols required officers to document the basis for passenger stops, emphasizing evidence over complaints. The airport partnered with the NAACP to develop a community oversight board, a first for a major U.S. hub. This is about trust, Callahan told reporters. We failed, Judge Marshall, and we'll earn back what we lost. The incident sparked broader change. In Chicago, Mayor Alicia Torres announced a review of police training citywide, citing Vivian's case as a wake-up call. Nationally, the Department of Justice launched a pilot program to address racial profiling in airports, with O'Hare as a test site. Vivian, though reluctant to embrace the spotlight, became a symbol of resistance. She declined most interview requests, but spoke at a Second Circuit conference, her words resonating. Justice isn't a gift. It's a demand we must make every day without fear. In her chambers months later, Vivian sat at her desk, sunlight streaming through the window. A new case file lay open, its pages dense with legal arguments. The memory of Gate B12 lingered, a scar that ached in quiet moments. She thought of her young client lost to a biased system, of Aisha, whose video had amplified truth, of the jurors who'd chosen justice over complicity. The fight was far from over, but Vivian was ready. She picked up her pen, her resolve unbreakable, and began to write. This is the story of Vivian Marshall, a woman who faced prejudice with unyielding courage, proving that even in the darkest moments, the law can be a beacon if we demand it.